Well, it depends what they use them for, doesn't it? I mean, I think one of the things I do feel quite strongly about is that it's buy-to-let. There are landlords who own, huge amounts of properties, and I think there might well be a question about that. But that's not the main issue here.
I mean, as Suzanne says, I don't think we're not the sort of party that's going to put limits on property ownership by the British people in their own country. But we do have some strong positions we take that, with housing being a finite resource and a resource that's in great shortage, we say, for instance, we would not allow non-British nationals in social housing to have the right to buy. We would not allow non-British nationals to take advantage of Help to Buy schemes with taxpayer incentives, and equally today on the Housing Association policy that the Tories are going to be announcing, we in general welcome anything that helps people achieve their ambitions and aspirations to be a homeowner, but we don't think foreign nationals again should be given discounts to acquire property in this country when property is in such short supply.
Richard Wheeler, Press Association. Twofold really. First, you sort of mentioned that you have sort of a modest number of houses, you don't think they're too big and that sort of stuff. What does your research show in terms of people that do come over and immigrants, how many houses they actually have? Have you sort of researched into this? And secondly, on the referendum proposal, who's actually paying for that? Is that falling on the developers or councils to organise? What sort of more thoughts have you got on that?
On the referendum, that will be funded. And in fact, it's not just local referendum that we're talking to. I think Douglas Carswell announced yesterday, every 2 years we will have a national referendum too on the issue that is of most importance to the British people. And that is, we have costed that, and that will be part of our manifesto plan costings. And I think it's great, that not only can people have a final say on what happens in their local area, but they will also nationally be able to directly influence what goes into the Queen's speech. Sorry, I can't remember what your first question was.
What research have you done in terms of immigrants that come over and actually buy houses and housing numbers that they own taken away from Britain?
There's a huge variation of scale there, isn't there? You have some very wealthy people coming into the country who are buying up houses and then just hardly ever using them and leaving them empty for most of the year, which is a great shame. And on the other hand, you have migrants coming in who are living in incredibly poor, cramped conditions, and effectively driving up rents for locals as well, because even if you're on a very low wage, if you're crammed into a house with 10 or however many of you there are, that's a very difficult issue then. It pushes up prices for everybody else too. And at the same time, you've got people living in rather squalid conditions, which is equally unfortunate. It's a massive problem. There's no simple answer to this, I don't think.
I think actually that there was quite a good expose in John's paper at the beginning of the year from Westminster Council about them thinking the right to buy was being abused potentially by foreign nationals who were coming in and being on housing benefit and then suddenly having the money to make a right to buy application. And I think Westminster, obviously a Tory-controlled authority, the Daily Mail did some good work exposing worries there that foreign nationals were exploiting right to buy, which is another reason why we say we would not allow foreign nationals to do that. And obviously, in order to put British people first across these housing policies, you would need to be outside the European Union, because EU law obliges national governments to treat every EU citizen in every respect as they would their own.
I think in Westminster alone, 31% of former council houses are now owned by buy-to-let landlords. I think there's an issue there.
How does it just on the countryside issue as well? I mean, how does sort of limiting development in certain areas, I mean, what's the transition period we've got here? Because the numbers for people coming into the country aren't suddenly going to stop. If your policies came in, there's still going to be people coming in and housing demand.
Well, actually, I don't know that that's the case. I mean, if we were to have a European Union referendum, if the public were to vote that we would leave the European Union, then our policies, we would be able to say, introduce our Australian point star system, and then we could stop the flow very quickly. I mean, we've said that we'll have a 5-year moratorium on immigration for unskilled workers. That will immediately cut numbers by 150,000 a year. And then we'll have the skilled workers coming in will be decided on that points-based system. I think it could actually make a very significant difference in a very short space of time.
You say that you've got a problem with empty properties. What would you do with all of those empty properties currently owned by what you call wealthy migrants? A lot of them probably would meet the criteria of your points-based system. And what would you do with those migrants living in existing HMOs? Have you got any retrospective plans? Can I also just ask what your estimate is for the amount of brownfield land that is currently available in acres?
Our research suggests that there are potentially, I'm not quite sure about the number in acres, and one of the things that we need to do is actually discover exactly how much brownfield land we've got. So one of our policies that we would ask for a national register to be created of brownfield sites. We estimate, not our estimates actually, there are other organisations that have estimated you could build up to 2.5 million properties on brownfield sites. That's obviously a little bit beyond our capabilities, I think, in the next 5 years. As I said, we'll be looking to put 1 million homes on brownfield sites by 2025, and we'll be rolling out a programme of grants and incentives to developers to do that, including removing stamp duty from first sale of new properties on brownfield sites and offering grants of £10,000 to developers per unit where there is need to clean up the land on brownfield sites, which has traditionally been something that has put developers off. Obviously, a lot of brownfield sites are also in areas of existing infrastructure, so you don't have the other problems that I talked about not having access to schools, to transport links and so on and so forth. So brownfield is definitely much a priority. In terms of what we can do about empty properties, I think that the figure of 300,000 is really those that are in a fairly rundown state, and those are the ones that we'll be targeting, not wealthy people who can pay their own way.
What with CPOs? Would you want local authorities would CPO the empty properties? What's the mechanism you'd use?
Yes, certainly that would be something that we would give to local authorities to be able to do that when houses have been deliberately left to run down and go to rack and ruin over a number of years. Houses of multiple occupation you also mentioned, that's a significant problem. I think it's a great shame that again, this is the Tory government removed the need to apply for planning permission to transform your property into a HMO, and instead just made it a permitted development right. I think that's something that should be looked at. I think a lot of people are extremely concerned about the way in which houses of multiple occupation are not looked after terribly well, and therefore cause problems in a locality. And I certainly know a lot of my former Conservative councillors were particularly upset that it was their government that actually brought in that rather unfortunate rule change.
Right, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day on the campaign trail. Oh, Joe, you've got one more question?
One more question.
Come on, Joe. You're in the Andrew Neil. You're in the Andrew Neil ceremonial grumpy chair. So.
Thank you for saving it for me. How far do you think the Tory plan to allow housing association tenants to buy their own properties will help in his bid to UKIP voters to come home to the Conservatives?
Well, I don't think it will, and the devil will be in the detail of this policy. I believe there's already something called right to acquire for housing association tenants. It'll be interesting to see how significant any proposed extension or facilitating of the ownership route really is in this policy. You know, some people may fear there might be an element of gimmick in it. I think the vast majority of people who intend to vote UKIP, you know, have had it with David Cameron's brand of conservatism, even if they were ever Conservative voters in the past, and an increasingly large proportion of our vote have never been attracted by the Tory message. So I think they see a man they can't really trust. You know, he says things on inheritance tax. He hasn't raised the threshold by a single penny for 5 years, and I think it was the 2013 budget small print revealed that they intend to keep the same rate of inheritance tax, the same threshold all the way to 2018. You know, cast iron promise of a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, that got dropped as well. Cast iron promise to bring net immigration down to the tens of thousands. It's running at nearly 300,000. I think, you know, millions and millions of people have just had it with David Cameron as a man who doesn't keep his promises. Thank you.